Hello. I hope we are live. Hi, everyone. I would like to first and foremost thank all the organizers for making such an awesome event. And to say that it's a great honor for me today to be sharing this keynote with Professor Adam Goodman, our dear advisor who helped the Scala Center organization formulate the governance project and soon-to-be strategy. Today, we will offer a concrete and theoretical points of view regarding the importance of fostering a healthy and resilient community and how to do it from inside out, leaning on the assets we have already at hand. So if there is one thing that you take out of this talk today, it would be that participation is mandatory. No community building happens in a vacuum, and Scala Center is definitely here to support, but we cannot do all the things all at once, all on our own. So let's dive in. There is something super exclusive that I'm bringing to you today, and I hope you're ready for it. We received some reports about the state of Scala in 2025, okay? And even more going forward about the state of Scala community. So I assume it's great to share this future with you today. This is Scala numbers in 2025. We've noticed that there are 300 new businesses who chose to build their software in Scala, 70 universities worldwide that are teaching programming using Scala, 40 Scala conferences worldwide, and many of them more than 10,000 participants. 100 capacity building trainings, some of them very technical, some... I need to stop here because the slides that I'm sharing are not the ones that I see on the screen. I'm sorry about this. I'm going to try this way. So whoever is sharing their screen needs to stop. Perfect, thank you. Sorry about that. So 100 capacity building trainings that range from how to fix an issue in a compiler to how do I become a moderator and continue within that sub-community. And there are 500 companies who contribute back to the project with their time, money, events that they make, or other trainings, and 3,000 members that are actively contributing back to the project. We also are bringing to you today a Scala Community Health Survey report that showed that there is a high retention rate and alumni engagement levels, a strong, welcoming, and inclusive culture, abundance of new, happy newcomers that have then a clear and accessible contributor development paths. And we noticed also high trust levels between members and leadership. And the people that did this survey also showed a satisfying psychological safety. All that to say that we can with certainty conclude that in 2025, Scala is a strong community-supported open source project. So this looks really, really great. Of course, today we're in 2022, and we do need to take a little bit in consideration the factors that happen today and try to build to that future and actually make it happen. So hashtag current status is that Scala is an open source technology, which implies that it depends heavily on community support. We do have indicators that show a steady but low inflow of newcomers, even in some instances slightly decreasing comparing to other years. It is close to impossible to quantify the amount of people that are leaving the community, or even more impossible to quantify the amount of people that are observing, trying a little bit, and then never actually engaging. And currently, most of the resources are invested in technical development. So we need the community to support Scala as a technical project, but it seems that there is a missing piece: who is supporting community. So it's not all that bad, and 2025 is not that far away. And the reason it's not all that bad is because we stand on a pile of experience. For many of you, you know that Scala was founded or designed or first released in 2004. But let's say started to be an industry standard from 2008. So we are standing on 15 years of experience in technical matters and in community matters. On top of that, we have Scala Center that was founded in 2016 as a not-for-profit language foundation that now has 6 years of experience and is stronger for it. On top of that, in the last 2 years, there was a strong need and support from the stakeholders to put our resources towards community-related projects. Even though investments don't follow, at least the need is present. We've been able to engage with experts and create a vision and hopefully a strategy proposal very soon. And finally, we can meet again. Pandemic is behind us, which means that we can go back to the conferences, hopefully already from next year, maybe even starting with the Scala Days. And we can actually put this action into reality. Okay, so I'm speaking about this vision and strategy and governance project, and I'm throwing a lot of words out there, but what is it exactly? What are we talking about? So I'm going to take you just a little bit before 2022, back to 2021, when there was really a big need shown, and our advisory board and stakeholders that we work with and different community members were really supporting Scala Center to invest all our resources in making a qualitative change within the community, making it more safer and more welcoming. So we did, as I said, a couple of times, saw this need and support. However, investment did not follow, and we do have our resources are limited. But luckily, by the end of 2021, EPFL, the university that we are at here in Lausanne, in Switzerland, actually came, listened to us and to our needs and put front a financial support. So we could finally start doing something from mid-January 2022. So the first thing we did was to engage an expert that is today speaking during this keynote with me. And the first thing we did with him was to map out a lot of things, to map out stakeholders, to map out decisions that need to be taken within the Scala community and open source, map out all kinds of things. So what did this map show to us? This is just a glimpse into it. It showed that there were many technical decisions that need to take place, but there are really not a lot of working groups or committees that are taking, I say decisions, but it can also be just conversations that are just non-existent. Another thing was shown throughout mapping out is that there are other things that are community related, such as questions as to, okay, we speak about community and there are members of the community, but who are the members, who are not, what does it define? So what are the goals and expectations of members, and so on and so forth, rights, responsibilities, how do we monitor health? And so this is something that came out of a mapping, and this is, I'm giving you a smaller number of points than the ones that we actually came up with, that showed and proved the point that I made earlier, that yes, we are all here to make sure that technology works, but it's people that make technology work. And people in a community have different needs that are absolutely, or to a certain point, I cannot say ignored, but not at least mapped out and worked out. So once we did that, the next thing was to learn what worked, what didn't, and to put our map into practice. And the result, the direct result that came out of it was to create the Scala improvement process. For those that don't know, it's a process that helps make all the design decisions around Scala. So it's one of the most important technical committees in the Scala community. And in parallel to that, we've done either helped initiate or have participated or supported many other types of summits, such as Teacher Summit, Compiler Academy. If you didn't hear about it, Google it. We started some talks with different tooling contributors and authors. And recently, Martin also spoke about the toolkit project. So we've been putting all these things in place one step at a time. The most recent thing that we've done is to focus on moderation, because we realize that even on our team, we are moderators, but not necessarily do we have capacities or the skills to apply to a point that the community needs us to do. And finally, we are looking into our advisory board and the memberships at the Scala Center, and we are rethinking and redesigning all the different pieces in that sector as well. So today we are here. It's a keynote day, and I'm presenting a little bit about the facts that happened up until now. And going forward, we hope to actually gather even more input from the community. Hopefully we get you to engage as well, even more, to bring about a strategy or a couple of proposals on the strategy, and see how we can continue putting these building blocks in place, and how we can support the community to self-organize and go forward together. So all this that I've showed here is what we actually call the governance project. So what is the governance project? It's really a project at the Scala Center that aims to empower community members to participate, share their opinion, and to finally make a difference within the community. Now, main question is, what is Scala Center's role in all of this? You know, I showed a lot of things and it seems like we're doing a lot. However, we do have a role to play. For sure, we can raise awareness. We can even secure initial resources. We can engage with experts. We can gather community feedback. We can propose strategy or strategies. We can motivate community members, and hopefully this talk does that as well. Support community in self-organizing, participate in working groups, organize community capacity building trainings. We can do a lot, but there are limits to what we actually can do, and there is a role that we don't want to play, whether because it doesn't align with our values, or because we literally are limited with tangible boundaries. So Scala Center role is absolutely not to work alone. It is not to make unilateral decisions, nor is it to impose solutions, or even implement the strategy that we can maybe help propose. But certainly it's not to be solely responsible for success or failure of this ongoing project. So to just illustrate why we are tangibly limited, this is our team. We are currently 12 people. Sometimes we are 9, sometimes we are 15. People come and go. And the core team is basically mostly software engineers, because that's what Scala Center does. We are trying to make sure that the project works, that Scala and everything in the ecosystem actually works. So if you take away team members that are actually working on the tech issues, we are left with 4 people. And within this group of 4 people, if you take away the 2 that are working 30% or less to support the team itself, we are left with 2 people. And if we look at these 2 people, they also have many other projects running. So this is how limited we are. And this is also why we need the community to realize that we are here really to support, but we are absolutely not here to do everything instead of the community. Okay, so you say it all sounds good, future is bright, we have all the tools, but what does this mean concretely for you? So, parentheses, if you are already contributing, maintaining, organizing, participating, I don't know, checking the typos, whatever you're doing, you're already a part of that project, whether you like it or not. So thank you very much, and please continue doing so. We just hope that we can join forces and make 2025 a reality, maybe even in 2024 with you. However, for those that are now thinking about joining, what would it mean concretely is that, first and foremost, please continue following the Scala governance project development. Soon enough, we are going to have a web page. We are going to have all the notifications that are needed, so you can follow. And then when you see that there is something that concerns you, step up, get involved, do something about it, propose solutions, participate in decision-making processes, concretely meet, and get your company to sponsor one of the events or dedicate your work time for participation. Also, in the meantime, you can form support groups. So if you are a moderator and you're alone and you're burning out, reach out to us, reach out to other moderators, and let's get this on the road together. But certainly in everyday communication, in your projects or projects that you are contributing and using, you can always make sure to implement a little bit of best practices, at least in communication. So even more concretely, you would invest, let's say, up to 5 hours a month, but then you would gain 15 hours a month otherwise wasted on finding your way through the noise. So there is a little bit to gain. Now, that's not all that you can gain out of all that investment. Beside time, you can also gain a voice and influence the direction of your favorite technology. You can get higher visibility to your work and your skills. You can, of course, gain experience in Scala and open source in general. Hopefully, some recommendations along the way, and maybe new and brighter perspectives in your career. Hopefully, along the way, you're going to have some good time with people that share the same values and love for Scala. And for the ones that are lucky enough, you can maybe even mentor some people and continue changing their lives. So if this doesn't convince you, I don't know what will. Going forward, make sure to follow Scala Lang, Scala Center, which is Scala epfl.ch, on Twitter, Scala Lang, and Scala Center LinkedIn page. Going forward, we have very good news, or we continue with good news for you, which is that there are models that describe healthy communities and practices that we can follow and that we know they work. Just like any other just like any other design problem, we brought in an expert to help advise and to help us think how to be intentional in creating a healthy and resilient community. So now I turn it over to Adam, who will continue with the second part of this presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Darja. I'm just going to take just a moment to start presenting my own slides real quickly. Okay. All right. So again, thank you, Darja, and thank you for your patience just while I got things set up for this second piece of this talk. And as Darja had said, I look at communities. By the way, just a little bit more about me and my background. I'm a professor at Northwestern in the McCormick School of Engineering, but I'm not an engineer, so I want to be clear about that. What I study is leadership, and in particular, I look at governance models and how people learn how to become more effective leaders. So, and I happen to do, because I'm based in the School of Engineering, I happen to do a lot of work with open source communities. And as we think about open source, one of the really powerful, and certainly one of the things that has me engaged around open source and community governance is, if you think about it, it's really a curious problem about how do you get hundreds, if not thousands, of people to self-organize and work together in a way that builds a project and builds a community and builds maybe even a product that is widely used and is feels like it's a shared sense of that community, rather than taking maybe a group within a company or some other organizational form where people are, where there's more of a top-down structure that might cause that product or that project to be successful. So thinking about sort of bottom up versus top down is a complicated problem, and it's even more complicated when you add in the global and more virtual dimension of open source. So when you're thinking about community governance in open source, what I'm trying to communicate to you is that it's really hard. And the question then is, so how do we do that work really well, so that we build community and we build, a project that meets the goals and aspirations and is reflective of the community's sensibility. So as we think about governance in that kind of a context, what I've got up on the screen here are just a list of questions that I'm certainly recommending that we consider as a community for Scala. So certainly one of the things we want to understand is, what's our mission? Why do we exist? What's our vision? What does success look like over the next 6 months, 2 years, 3 years, whatever that might be? And then obviously from a strategic perspective, what are the investments that we're going to make? And I'm not just talking about money here. I'm talking about people's time and getting people focused and organized to want to contribute that time. How are we going to do that work, right? What are the resources that we need along the way? And so that's sort of one piece of what we want to talk about when we're thinking about effective community governance. Another piece that we want to think about is, so how is my voice heard, right? What are the decisions that need to be made? Who is empowered to make those decisions? And if I can be clear about, as just a regular community member, as part of Scala, if I can be clear about what those avenues are, right? What are those opportunities for my voice to be heard? Then I begin to know how I can contribute. So part of what's going on whenever you're getting any form of community together is you're working on the issue itself, the topic, the opportunity, the problem, whatever it is that you're trying to solve. And at the same time, we want transparency around the process as well, right? So again, so that people know how and when they can contribute. This becomes, as I was indicating, a very complicated problem when we're talking about something like open source. And the path that I want to take us down, because I think it will be very effective for Scala, is something called asset-based community development, or ABCD for short. And ABCD has been around for decades. One of the reasons that I like it is that it is used globally. So it accounts for lots and lots of different variations in terms of culture and geography and how people can connect with each other. The core assumption that sits inside asset-based community development is that when we tend to think about communities, and if we tend to think about how am I going to help or engage with a community, and you might think about it not just as Scala, you might think about it as literally the physical, the geographic neighborhood in which you live, because that's really the core of where ABCD has come from. And you'll see that in some of the slides that follow. They're assuming that we're talking about sort of a physical neighborhood as opposed to a virtual one. But I think the concepts apply and work just as well in a virtual neighborhood. But anyway, when I go to a community, I can have sort of one of two orientations. The first orientation is I'm here to help. What are your problems, and how can I help you solve those problems? And that's typically how we organize and think about how we want to contribute in a community context. ABCD flips that on its head, as you can see on this slide, and it asks a fundamentally different question, which is not how do I come in and tell you what to do because I'm an outside expert, but instead, how do we understand the assets and capacities that already exist in this community? So rather than seeing the proverbial glass half empty, ABCD starts with a different assumption, which is the glass is already half full, if not more full. And if we can tap into the assets and capacities of the people who are in this community, if that's our starting point, and that's the key, if that's our starting point, it takes on a very different approach rather than a deficiencies and needs model. So if you think about, sort of, again, a more geographic representation of this, when we think about a neighborhood, oftentimes we sort of think about these are some of the problems that are in various neighborhoods. And again, what we want to do is flip that around and think about what are the assets that already exist in the Scala community. And I want to start with what's at the center of this particular model, which is the gifts of individuals, right? What is it that is already present and here, frankly, on this program right now, but every time we engage with the Scala community? What happens if we start the conversation with, what are your gifts? What are your talents? What is it that you want to bring? Right? And then we build out from there, again, rather than starting with the assumption of what's broken and what needs to be fixed. So that's the path that I want to go down. And when you think about gifts that you can give to your community, it's helpful to think about it in 3 dimensions, right? The first are sort of gifts of the head. What are the things that I know, right? What is it that I can bring that others would enjoy? But think about it again from a technical perspective, right? What are the things that I already know in my head about Scala, or the things that I already know about technical writing, or things that I already know about how to pull people together? Right. So those are gifts of the head. Gifts of the hands are a little bit more skill-based. So that's what happens when you sit down and actually start to write code, for example, or when you actually start to write technical notes that go into the software that others can access. Right. So those are gifts of the hands. And then lastly, obviously, are gifts of the heart. And this is how people tend to think about community in a more intangible yet meaningful sense. And so how do we know when we meet that we have a healthy community? And how do I contribute to making that happen? These are the people who gather us together, right? That's part of the gifts of the heart. So again, one of the challenges or questions that I want to put in front of you today is to start to think about, what are your gifts? What is it that you might bring to the Scala community? And think about it in these multiple dimensions, not just a single dimension. Another way of thinking about gifts is from the perspective of assets. And ABCD looks at assets, in 6 different ways. So obviously, there's the individuals, there's you, just being a part of this community. But there's also the associations, right? What are the various groups that already exist in Scala? And what are the groups that we might want to create, those associations that don't yet exist. And then we have institutions. Obviously, the Scala Center is an example of an institution, whereas an association, it might be closer to something like SIP. As Darja had said, one of the things that I know Scala wants to do is bring people back together. That's the physical space. And certainly when we bring people back together in a physical and more tangible way, we know that that helps particularly more virtual communities engage. We all look forward to those conferences and those opportunities to be together when we get together in that third city, wherever it is in the world. That's what creates opportunities that are that can't be done in a more virtual space. So as you're thinking about, again, your gifts and the assets that that Scala has, where are those moments that we do bring people together? Next is the idea of exchange, right? So what is it that you have that might benefit me, and what is it that I have that might benefit you, right? So maybe I have a place where we can meet. Maybe I have some kind of software or other resource that you want that will help you do your job better. So again, there's an asset around the concept of exchange. And lastly, and maybe a little bit more intangibly, but just as important, is the idea of what's our culture? What are our stories? What's our history? What gets us excited, right? What are the stories that we tell in hallways or before the call starts that, are fun and engaging, or maybe even a little bit scary, that talk about where Scala has been and where it might want to go. So again, this is a more positive framing. Now, when ABCD looked at literally the thousands of communities where they have done their work, what they have found, and this is where we want to start with Scala in terms of using this approach, what they have found is that there are sort of three pieces that are critical. The first is that you already know what the local assets are, and it's about highlighting what those assets are. Who are those people that are already contributing, that, they contribute quietly, maybe they contribute with, a little bit more flair and a little bit more awareness, but who are those people and how do we tap into them? Those immediate neighbors, those people who you tend to work with, you already know what assets they might bring. And that as we start to pull, again, virtual, but also physical neighborhoods together, right? It's about how do we get those assets? How do we get those people connected? And one of those key pieces is obviously, who are the connectors, right? Who are the individuals, the associations, the local institutions that act as conveners to bring people together? This is a key piece that we want to be able to identify as we think about Scala's community, right? How are you an asset, right? How do you help? How do our neighbors come to know what those assets are that you would bring? And then obviously, how do we get people connected to each other? Now, if you happen to be one of those connectors, this is probably what it is that you're going to bring. Again, you're not thinking about deficits, you're thinking about gifts. You're thinking about, I know so-and-so and they can bring this thing, right? They tend to be trusted. And they also believe that our community, the Scala community, is a welcoming community. And that doesn't mean that it's all fairy tales. It means that we know how to welcome and embrace and support people in a way that they feel that they can make their best contributions. So as Scala starts to move down this path, what I want us to be thinking about is not, again, what are our deficits? How do we bring in others to help us? How do we bring in that other outside consultant, that other outside expert, whatever it is? That's not where I want you to start. Where I want you to start is, what is it that we already have? Again, there's an exercise called asset mapping that I'm certain we're going to do in the coming months and years. And so we're going to start to understand, where do those assets exist in the Scala community? And then how do we organize them in a way that where we start with what it is that we already have rather than what it is that we already need, then we can figure out what are those few things where we might need some outsiders to come in and help us. But my suspicion is that Scala as a community is large enough and robust enough and diverse enough that most of what Scala is going to need already exists in the community. It's just about tapping into those resources, figuring out how we create an environment where people contribute and do so happily and well, where people know, again, what it is that they can bring, and they see a path for themselves in terms of being able to do that kind of work. So as we think about you in a nice way, and as you're listening to this, these are the kinds of questions that I want you to start to be asking of yourself, right? So what are your talents and gifts, right? What is it that you want, that you can contribute to Scala as a community, right? And as we start to think about connecting people, and as we start to think about infrastructure and structures and processes and committees that go way beyond SIP, right? How do I know what contributions I can bring for community success, especially those that are needed right now, right? What is it that's needed? How do I stay informed and engaged enough, and that I can raise my hand and say, you know what, I think I can help solve this issue, go after this challenge, whatever it is that Scala is trying to get done next. So that's one way of thinking about questions that I want you to think about. What are my strengths and how do I know how to deploy them? Just as important, though, is what are we doing to create a community sensibility so that when you make those contributions, that they're valued, right? We all know that there are healthy and unhealthy aspects in every community, and obviously that would include Scala. So what are the things that we're doing right now that impede your ability to want to contribute your voice, that impede your ability to want to contribute your ideas and your time and your talent and your energy? How do we identify those? And then, frankly, how do we solve them so that there's less friction? And think about, a concept that Darja set up earlier, which is the idea of design, right? So how do we design our community in such a way that you want to contribute because you know that your voice is going to be heard, that you know that your ideas will be considered? That doesn't mean you get everything you want. Doesn't mean you win all the time. Doesn't mean you lose all the time. It means that you know that you're being heard and that you have as much voice as anybody else in the community, right? So what we want to do is create systems and processes and neighborhoods. Again, I know this is all virtual, or much of it is virtual. How do we create those neighborhoods in a way that makes sure that your voice can be heard? Some of you may be familiar with the concept of psychological safety, and I want to talk about that next. And the idea here is psychological safety in my field is more of a technical term, and what it means is that you can express yourself in a way that makes you feel welcome, respected, supported, and valued, right? That your ideas, in fact, will be heard. And as I start to talk about this idea of psychological safety in the Scala community, I want to distinguish between dialogue and discussion, or dialogue and debate. So when we're talking in regular day-to-day discussion, typically what happens is, I'm trying to figure out how am I going to respond to what it is that you're saying. So in my family, it's the sort of nightly conversation of what are we going to do for dinner? Answer, I don't care, right? And what I'm doing in that moment, when I say I don't care, whatever you make is fine, kind of thing. What's really going on is that I know the question is coming and I've already thought about what my answer is to that question. That's discussion, and that's pretty much how we navigate day to day. Debate is obviously a different form, which is I'm going to argue my points as strongly as I can. Others are going to argue their points as strongly as they can. And in a sense, there are some winners and losers in that, right? So my job is to make sure that my ideas are heard, but they're heard at the expense of other ideas that are also being discussed. That's more of a debate form. And again, there are good reasons to have debates. But what I want to suggest for Scala is that we're better off as a community shifting to something called dialogue. And what dialogue starts with a concept called active listening. And basically, can I understand what it is that you're trying to say to me to your satisfaction before I start to form an opinion, before I get into that discussion or debate mode? In other words, can I slow down and listen? And if we can engage with dialogue and do so in an asset-based way, then we're going to start to build a healthy community. Because not only does it obviously build naturally towards psychological safety, but it helps me understand what are the contributions that I can make, frankly, because I'm being heard. So in dialogue, again, it's not about speed. It's about slowing down to listen. And my experience over and over again, when we use dialogue as a form of community development. So again, you're not going to be doing this every day, but when we use it in a community development context, I'm really seeking first to understand what others are saying. And then I can start to respond. Now, how we do this matters. And so what I've put up here are just some questions or some concepts, forgive me, some concepts about how to do this work really, really well. And frankly, just do it routinely, which is to make some assumptions about the other person, right? It starts with that, right? It's that we're all experimenting. We're all trying to get to some form of an answer, that I'm open to the possibility that a better answer exists. And that when I get frustrated or when I behave in ways that are more challenging rather than more curious, right? That puts the conversation at a little bit of risk. And again, I'm not advocating that there's never should be challenge in discussions when people get together to talk. But what I am suggesting is that the path to building a healthier community starts with dialogue rather than, posting something that is designed to incite others, right? There are reasons why sometimes that can be useful, but it's not what's going to build the kind of community that I think in a healthy way that Scala is aiming for. So again, I want to get us focused on assets, and I want to get us focused on this very important concept of dialogue. So where do we start? Where should we be starting as a community? And this is where I want to encourage you to start. Let's not make it complicated. Start to think about what are your gifts of the hands, heart, and head, right? What do you enjoy most about contributing to Scala? The research is very, very clear from a leadership and a teamwork perspective that when people contribute their gifts, you get better answers and you get better teamwork. So again, don't think about it as what's missing. Think about what do I bring? And then how do I make those contributions in a way that, again, it's open source, right? That enables others to contribute. It's not just about me. So again, how do I contribute in a way that allows and encourages others to contribute? And part of the answer there is what's your responsibility for building and maintaining psychological safety every time we engage as a community? What's my responsibility to make sure that people feel that their voices can be heard and not that I'm shutting them down, not that I'm trying to prove myself right because I need to prove you wrong, right? How do we do so in a way that encourages dialogue? And then lastly, and I know this sounds, a little bit sort of obvious, but Darja and her team are going to work hard to create avenues to be clear about here's how you can contribute to community governance. So obviously what the Scala Center needs and what we want as a community is for you to have enough awareness about what's next, that you can start to see about, well, here's where we are on the map, and here's where I think I can make a contribution, or how do you stay connected with one of those connectors who you know, so that they can help create those opportunities for you and the people who are in your neighborhood. So I'm going to pause here, and I think we're going to open it up for questions for the last few minutes.
Wow, what a wonderful keynote and such a perfect topic for a Scala community event like this. Thank you both for tackling this and really fostering a healthy Scala community. I think we have time for a couple questions, so let's jump into it. All right, first, based on a participation in the community, is it accurate to say that decisions about the future of Scala and the compiler lie with a single individual? If so, will this still be the case in 2015?
Fantastic question. I'm going to start with the last part. So in 2025, because we have the reports and everything, what happens in 2025 is that community contributes 3 times more than that one individual. There is an infrastructure in place, and that one individual left for a very long and well-deserved holiday. So community is fine, decisions are being made, and everything is pink and fuzzy in 2025. But jokes aside, so yeah, it's a perception that is tangibly provable. So Martin Dersky is the designer of the language. It started from the lab here at EPFL 15 years ago. So certainly he's one of the biggest contributors as well, still until this day. I feel like he has like a twin brother or something. It's just impossible how much this guy does. So he has a big influence, and as well as he should. However, with the SIP committee, so the Scala improvement process, he is not alone. He's not doing this only fully on his own. And for those who know Martin, so one thing is the perception, another thing is what happens every day. Martin is very much involved in discussing and opening and like always being in the front to get all that he can as feedback and so on and so forth. So I don't know if I'm answering this question, but yeah, Scala is a language that was designed by one or few people. And so the influence is apparent. But I do want to say one more thing towards 2025. Eventually, that one person will go for a holiday, retirement, or outside of this planet, and Scala should continue to work. So that's what Scala Center does, is that we are trying to figure out what happens after that person decides to no longer influence the language.
Excellent. All right, I think we have time for one more question, so let's squeeze it in. It seems like a lot of this is predicated on people acting in good faith. Do you have any thoughts about how to work out when someone is acting in bad faith and responding accordingly?
So do you want me to give a response to that?
You're the expert.
Yeah, I was gonna say. So as I started to get to know Scala, one of the things that became apparent to me, and again, I work with other open source communities all the time, is that while a code of conduct exists, there is not a mechanism to reconcile or rehabilitate or frankly sanction people who may be behaving contrary to those standards, right? So we have a code of conduct, but there's not a mechanism to really work through what happens next. And part of the path that we want to be on is how to figure that out. And I want to be clear, ABCD and sort of the concepts that I was talking about, this is hard work. This is not all we're going to grow some roses and everything's going to be beautiful and wonderful. And, you know, we can assume that there are no bad actors or any of that. None of that is true. We should absolutely assume that there are going to be people who try and take advantage of the community in ways that help them and harm the community. And how I want you to think about this is as a kind of social contract, right? And what we know about healthy communities is you can analogize between sort of a healthy community and a biological system. This is actually work that comes from a colleague of mine, Meg Wheatley. And basically what she talks about in this analogy of a biological systems and communities is that if you have a system that is too diverse, right, that system will actually die. But the opposite is also true. If you have a system that is too alike, right, where there's too many of the same things going on, that system also dies. And so what you're looking for is a healthy community where there are some shared concepts, there are some shared agreements about, for example, how we work together to be a part of this community. And there's also a lot of investment and a lot of encouragement and diversity as well. This is the idea behind the social contract, is that I'm going to make a decision about whether I'm going to join this community because there are norms, behaviors, and expectations that we want to hold each other to. And the way in which people communicate, the way in which people contribute matters. That's really important. And that structure then enables people to, if it's done well, enables people to contribute in, frankly, in healthy and happy ways that enrich them and that enrich the community. So there is no community that is going to exist in open source or any place else that isn't going to have some form of these are our norms, behaviors, and expectations. And again, some of that already exists, but it needs to be backed up with the ability to say, and here's how you stay as a member of this community. Right? And if you violate those sanctions in particular, those behaviors in particular ways, there are some sanctions that are going to be out there. That's the piece that for Scala, as I said earlier, is missing and that we just need to add in.
Wonderful. Adam, thank you so much for taking the time to answer that question. That was great. And thank you both for being here. Such a wonderful keynote. Really appreciate it. And I hope you enjoy the rest of ScalaCon.
Fire in retro rock.
Roger, Matt. Ready to eject.